In 1997, workers clearing land outside the city of Pereira, Colombia, made a discovery that stopped the country cold. Scattered across a hillside were the remains of 36 boys. Nobody had reported them missing. Nobody had been looking. Somewhere in Colombia, a monster had been operating in plain sight for years. His name was Luis Garavito, and the world had no idea how bad it really was. Colombia in the 1990s was a country consumed by its own chaos. Drug cartels, guerrilla warfare, political violence. Massacres were common, disappearances were common. In that climate, nobody noticed when poor children began vanishing from rural towns and city streets. They were street children mostly, boys between 8 and 16 years old. Children of vendors, farmers, and families with nothing. When they disappeared, there was no one to make noise about it. That silence is what allowed Luis Garavito to keep going. Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos was born on January 25, 1957, in Genova, a small town in the Quindío region of western Colombia. He was the eldest of 7 children in a poor family. His childhood was marked by violence, neglect, and cruelty from those around him. By his teenage years, he had already shown signs of serious psychological damage. He left home at 16. He drifted, he drank heavily, he worked odd jobs. He was, as he later described himself, a vagabond, a man nobody noticed. That invisibility would become his greatest weapon. Garavito moved constantly across Colombia, never staying long in one place. He changed his name. He changed his appearance. He posed as a monk, a priest, a street vendor, a charity worker. He approached boys with small amounts of money, food, or the promise of work. Once he had gained their trust, he led them away from populated areas, into the countryside, into the hills. The boys trusted him because he seemed harmless, because he smiled, because adults in positions of authority were supposed to be safe. The first confirmed pattern emerged in 1997, when investigators connecting disappearances across multiple Colombian states began to realize they were looking at the same killer. The discovery near Pereira confirmed their worst fears. 36 sets of remains on a single hillside. Investigators eventually identified mass burial sites across 11 Colombian states and parts of Ecuador. The victims were always boys, always from poor families, always in areas where their absence would not trigger immediate alarm. The scale was almost impossible to process. Detective Aldemar Marin was one of the first investigators to push the serial killer theory. When he brought his evidence to his superiors, they were skeptical, not because the violence seemed unusual, but because Colombia had so much violence that a lone predator targeting children barely registered as a priority. The investigation was underfunded and fragmented. Different regions were tracking the same killer without knowing it. Garavito exploited that chaos perfectly. He kept moving. He kept killing. For nearly a decade, nobody connected the dots fast enough to stop him. April 22nd, 1999, Villavicencio, Colombia. A homeless man witnessed Garavito attempting to assault a 12-year-old boy named John Ivan Sabogal and intervened. Police arrived and arrested Garavito on the spot. They had no idea who they had caught. He was processed on a minor charge. It was only during questioning weeks later that investigators began to suspect they were talking to the man behind the mass graves. On October 28, 1999, Garavito confessed. He began drawing maps showing burial sites across the country. The number of locations was staggering. Garavito was convicted of the murders of 189 boys and sentenced to 1,853 years in prison. Colombian law, however, had a maximum imprisonment limit, with reductions for cooperating with investigators and helping locate victims. His sentence was reduced dramatically. Many Colombians were outraged. The man responsible for the largest confirmed child murder case in modern history could potentially have walked free within decades. He did not. Luis Garavito died in prison on October 12, 2023, in Valledupar, Colombia. He was 66 years old. The boys he killed were invisible in life. Street children, poor children, children the system had already forgotten. That invisibility is what made the killing possible. A functioning society notices when its children disappear. Colombia in the 1990s was too broken, too violent, too distracted to notice in time. Luis Garavito killed at least 189 people. The real number may never be known. He called himself a vagabond, a man nobody noticed. He was right, and that cost Colombia its children. Southern Dark, true crime from the darkest corners of Latin America.